On a flight from South Korea to the United States, two black Korean soccer players, Jamal and Kofi, stepped into the first-class cabin with confidence, only to quickly become the target of judgmental stares. An unjust request from the flight crew forced them down to economy class, where simmering prejudices erupted into a quiet confrontation. What the flight crew didn't realize, they had just insulted two national soccer icons. Will Jamal and Kofi's pride succumb to injustice, or will they rise up to challenge a system riddled with prejudice? A journey through the skies turns into a battleground where fairness, dignity, and bias clash head-on. The truth will come to light, and what unfolds on this fateful flight will send shockwaves across the world. Let's step into a story where pride and the fight for change are put to the ultimate test. Jamal wore a black hoodie with his team's logo, pulling a large suitcase and cracking jokes as he walked. Kofi, now that we're headed to the US, how much fried food do you think my mom's going to make me eat this time? Last time, she made a whole table of fried chicken bigger than a soccer field. Kofi, with his usual calm demeanor, simply smiled. He pushed his luggage cart casually, not responding immediately. After a few moments, he said, "Let your mom handle that. What I care about more is whether I can actually get some good sleep on this flight. What are you worried about?" "We're flying first class." Jamal raised an eyebrow teasingly. "There's no seat more comfortable than that." Kofi nodded but didn't say more. In his eyes there was a quiet stillness, as if he sensed something unusual. When the two of them approached the first-class check-in counter, their presence quickly drew attention. Some people nearby turned to look, their gazes a mix of curiosity and judgment. An elderly couple whispered to each other in Korean, making no effort to lower their voices. "Black people? First class? I thought this cabin was only for the elite." "They must be athletes," the wife replied, her eyes scanning them. "But it's still strange. They don't look Korean at all." Jamal didn't pay any attention, but Kofi noticed every glance, every word. Though he had grown used to subtle prejudice throughout his life in Korea, he couldn't stop the uncomfortable feeling creeping into his chest. When they reached the check-in counter, the receptionist, a young woman in the airline's uniform, smiled professionally at first, but as soon as she saw them, her smile faltered slightly. She took their tickets and passports, glanced at them, then looked back at the two men, her eyes betraying a hint of suspicion. "Mr. Reed and Mr. Johnson, correct?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes," Kofi replied, polite but firm. "Please hold on a moment while I double-check," she said, stepping back to make a call on the internal phone. Jamal shrugged and leaned toward Kofi, whispering, "They're really thorough about checking our tickets. Is first class off limits for black people or something?" Kofi glanced at him without answering, but his eyes seemed to say, "You already know the answer to that." After a brief wait, the receptionist returned their tickets and passports, offering an awkward smile. "Apologies for the inconvenience. You may proceed to the security area." When they entered the first-class lounge, the luxurious surroundings made Jamal unable to hide his excitement. He sank into a plush leather chair, pulling out his phone to snap pictures, grinning as he spoke. "Hey, did you see this? This place is even better than a five-star hotel. We deserve this after winning the whole season." Kofi smiled faintly but didn't respond. Instead, he opened a small carry-on bag, took out a book, and quietly started reading. However, the atmosphere in the lounge gradually grew heavier. They could feel the scrutinizing stares from a few other passengers, people who couldn't hide their surprise and even discomfort at the sight of two black men sitting in a space typically assumed to be reserved for Koreans or upper-class white travelers. A middle-aged man in a sharp suit leaned toward a staff member, speaking just loud enough for them to hear. "I thought this lounge was only for real VIPs." The staff member looked flustered but said nothing, only offering a nervous smile before walking away. Jamal heard it clearly. His hands clenched into fists, but Kofi placed a calming hand on his shoulder, signaling him to stay composed. Jamal exhaled deeply and muttered under his breath, "It's always like this." The announcement over the speakers signaled that boarding for the first-class cabin on the flight to Los Angeles had begun. Jamal and Kofi stood up, gathered their belongings, and headed toward the gate. As they approached the boarding checkpoint, they encountered Catherine Park, the flight's lead attendant. Catherine, a Korean woman in her 30s with sharp features and a professional demeanor, immediately took notice of them. Her eyes swept over the two of them carefully, as though she were assessing them. "Welcome aboard," Catherine said in Korean, but her expression betrayed a subtle sense of unease. Jamal noticed her attitude but responded with a polite smile. "Thank you. We're looking forward to a smooth flight." Once inside the first-class cabin, Jamal and Kofi quickly found their seats, two adjacent window seats, spacious and fully equipped with amenities. Jamal settled in, reclining into his seat, clearly ready to enjoy the long flight. However, Kofi remained quiet. He didn't say a word, but his eyes stayed observant, watching everything around them, from how the other passengers glanced their way to how the flight attendants interacted with them. About 20 minutes after everyone had settled in, Catherine walked down the aisle, checking each seat. When she reached Jamal and Kofi, she stopped. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said, trying to keep her tone polite. "I need to check your tickets again." Jamal frowned but still pulled his ticket out of his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Catherine took it, glanced at it, and scanned it with her handheld device. After a few seconds, she handed it back without saying anything further. Jamal sighed. "I don't understand why our tickets always get checked more thoroughly than anyone else's." Catherine didn't reply, simply nodding before moving on. But as her gaze swept over them one last time, Kofi realized one thing: this wouldn't be the last time they'd face suspicion on this flight. Jamal leaned over toward Kofi's seat and whispered, "Do you get the feeling this isn't going to end well?" Kofi put his book down and nodded slightly. "This is just the beginning." The seemingly random encounter between Jamal and Kofi and the lead flight attendant, Catherine Park, on what should have been a quiet flight, had marked the start of a series of events no one could have anticipated. Would the unspoken tension in Catherine's gaze and the calm demeanor of the two athletes lead to something unexpected? Jamal and Kofi's journey was just beginning. Don't miss what happens next, where unconscious biases will come to light and the pride of two extraordinary individuals will be put to the ultimate test. Leave a comment and stay tuned. As the plane took off and reached cruising altitude, the first-class cabin settled into its characteristic quiet. The soothing hum of the engines and the soft ambient lighting created a luxurious and relaxing atmosphere. A few passengers reclined their seats to rest, while others pulled out laptops or books to work or read. Jamal leaned back in his seat, trying to relax. He had chosen a comedy film on his personal entertainment screen and was chuckling quietly as the main character got tangled in a ridiculous situation. Kofi, as usual, remained focused on his book, his eyes fixed on the pages with calm concentration. But they couldn't fully enjoy the space. Jamal could feel Catherine Park's gaze, sharp and scrutinizing, never fully leaving them. Every time Catherine walked past, she seemed to deliberately slow down near their seats, her eyes keen as if searching for a reason to find fault. Jamal shrugged and turned to Kofi. "I bet she's thinking about how to kick us out of here." Kofi glanced up, his expression calm as ever. "We haven't done anything wrong. Our tickets are valid, and this space is ours." Jamal gave a faint, wry smile. "Yeah, you're right. But, sometimes you don't need a reason, just being different is enough." About 30 minutes after takeoff, Catherine appeared at the back of the first-class cabin, walking down the aisle with an air of confidence, though her demeanor was cold and rigid. She stopped right in front of Jamal and Kofi's seats. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Catherine said, her voice polite but with a hint of firmness. "I need to have a word with you both." Jamal looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Is there a problem, flight attendant?" Catherine glanced at the two men, then took a deep breath, as if to gather her confidence. "We've just double-checked the information in our system, and I'm afraid there might have been a mistake with the seat assignments. I'm going to have to ask you to move to the economy cabin." Her words hit the air like a slap. Jamal's eyes widened, as though he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Kofi slowly closed his book, his gaze sharper than usual. "A mistake," Jamal said, letting out a bitter laugh. "You already checked our tickets and everything was fine. We paid for first class, and we're sitting in the seats we purchased. Why should we move?" Catherine, still trying to maintain her composure, but with a hint of irritation in her expression, responded. "I'm sorry, but our system indicates there's an issue with these seats. We'll reassign you seats in the economy cabin, and you'll receive a partial refund after the flight." Kofi spoke up, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "I think you need to provide a clearer explanation. These are our tickets, valid and already verified. If there's no legitimate reason, we're not moving." For a brief moment, a flicker of hesitation crossed Catherine's face, but she quickly regained her stern demeanor. "I'm simply following protocol." If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to call security." At this point, Jamal couldn't hold back any longer. He stood up abruptly, locking eyes with Catherine. "You're doing this because we're black, aren't you? Because we don't look like your typical first-class passengers. Stop dancing around it, just admit it." Jamal's words rang out clearly in the quiet atmosphere of the first-class cabin, causing several nearby passengers to turn their heads. Some looked on with curiosity, while others awkwardly averted their eyes, as if unwilling to get involved. Catherine clenched her fists, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not implying anything like that. But if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call someone to handle this situation." Kofi placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, gently pulling him back into his seat. He turned to Catherine, his eyes no longer holding any patience. "Go ahead and call them. We're not leaving these seats unless you provide a valid reason." A tense silence settled over the first-class cabin. Catherine hesitated for a moment, then turned on her heels and walked away. Jamal slumped back into his seat, exhaling sharply. "See that? They always think we don't belong here." Kofi didn't reply, but his gaze shifted to the window, his jaw tight as he fought to contain his anger. Memories of the discrimination he had faced growing up in South Korea flooded his mind, being called cruel nicknames, having to work twice as hard to prove himself, always feeling out of place. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman who had been watching the entire scene looked at them with a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. She seemed like she wanted to say something but ultimately turned away, as if afraid that speaking up would make the situation worse. A few minutes later, Catherine returned, this time with two other flight attendants following closely behind her. She pointed at Jamal and Kofi, her tone firmer now. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid I must insist that you relocate your seats immediately." Jamal glanced at Kofi, then sighed deeply. He didn't want to escalate the situation further, even though he knew they were being treated unfairly. "Fine," Jamal said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "If that's what you want, we'll move. But I promise, you're going to regret this." Kofi rose from his seat, his eyes locked on Catherine's. "I hope you're prepared to face the consequences of your actions." Catherine didn't respond, silently watching as the two men gathered their belongings and left the first-class cabin, leaving a heavy, uncomfortable atmosphere behind them. Jamal and Kofi entered the economy cabin with disappointment and anger etched on their faces. The environment here was entirely different, cramped, noisy, and devoid of the privacy they'd had moments earlier. They settled into two seats near the back of the cabin, the tight space forcing them to squeeze into their new, much smaller accommodations. Jamal dropped his backpack onto the floor with a thud, muttering under his breath, "I swear, they're not getting away with this." Kofi nodded, his voice lower than usual. "There's no need to rush. Let it all play out. We'll speak up when the time is right." Jamal and Kofi walked slowly through the cramped rows of economy class, trying to maintain their composure despite the anger simmering inside them. The atmosphere here was completely different from first-class, noisy, crowded, with passengers struggling to stow their luggage and the cries of restless children echoing throughout the cabin. As they reached their assigned seats, a few passengers in economy began to take notice. Their eyes lingered, some curious, some sympathetic. To them, the presence of the two tall men with striking features and dark skin brought a distinct air of uniqueness. A young boy sitting nearby stared at Jamal with wide-eyed admiration, but his mother quickly pulled him close and whispered something to discourage him. Jamal sat down in the window seat, his hand gripping the armrest tightly. Kofi took the seat next to him, exhaling quietly. Both of them felt as though they had been dragged down from the pinnacle of their dignity, all because of the unreasonable prejudices they had faced their entire lives. Suddenly, Jamal let out a sarcastic laugh, breaking the tense silence. "You know," he said, "I bet there's a flight attendant somewhere celebrating right now, thinking she succeeded in putting us in our place." Kofi looked at him, his eyes sharp. "Jamal, don't let your anger control you. We don't need to prove anything. Let the truth speak for itself." About 10 minutes later, a boy around 9 years old, an African-American kid, approached them. He was wearing a South Korea soccer jersey with the logo of the national team Jamal and Kofi used to play for, and his eyes sparkled with excitement. "Mr. Jamal." "Mr. Kofi," the boy exclaimed in English. Jamal turned to Kofi, surprised, then broke into laughter. "Well, it seems like we're not forgotten after all, huh?" The boy continued enthusiastically. "I've seen all your games on TV. I love how you dribble and pass, Mr. Jamal and Mr. Kofi. Your shots are unstoppable. I'm your biggest fan. Jamal's face lit up with a wide smile, the anger inside him slowly dissipating. He patted the boy gently on the head and said, "Thanks, kid. What's your name?" "I'm Tyler," the boy said loudly, unable to contain his excitement. Tyler's mother walked over, offering a polite smile as she apologized for her son's excitement. But when she realized who Jamal and Kofi were, her smile shifted into one of astonishment. "Wait, are you soccer players? Jamal and Kofi? Oh my gosh, my son Tyler absolutely loves you both. We're happy to meet your family," Kofi responded gently in English. Tyler and his mother's interaction quickly drew the attention of nearby passengers. A few people started to recognize the famous athletes and whispers began to spread. Curious and astonished glances replaced the indifference they had been met with earlier. A middle-aged man in a suit, sitting across the aisle, leaned toward Kofi and asked in Korean, "Are you Kofi Johnson? I think I saw you on TV during last year's national championship final." Kofi nodded politely and replied, "Yes, that's right. Thank you for watching." The man smiled, but his expression quickly shifted into one of confusion. "But why are you sitting in economy class? I thought famous players like you would be treated better." His question caught the attention of more passengers nearby. An elderly woman sitting in front turned around, curious to hear the conversation. A younger passenger in a t-shirt muttered in English, "I don't get it. Why are they back here?" Jamal shrugged, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, just a little misunderstanding in first class. Nothing important." But his sharp gaze and the bitterness in his voice made it clear that they had endured something far from trivial. The story spread throughout the economy cabin. Passengers nearby began to voice their discontent over how the situation had been handled. A young man seated nearby, who looked like a lawyer, spoke up with frustration in his tone. "If you had first-class tickets, no one has the right to bump you down here. This is blatant discrimination," a middle-aged Korean woman added. "I've heard about things like this. Black people in Korea are always treated unfairly, no matter how talented or accomplished they are. It's disgraceful." The story continued to ripple through the cabin. More passengers began glancing toward the front of the plane, as if considering calling the flight crew to demand answers. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, Catherine Park was trying to continue her duties, but she couldn't shake the uneasiness in her chest. She began to notice that some passengers in first class were murmuring among themselves and glancing toward the back of the plane. A young flight attendant, Anna Kim, approached Catherine and whispered, "Catherine, I think we might have made a mistake. I just heard that those two men are Jamal and Kofi. They're very famous soccer players in Korea. If this gets out, it could become a big issue." Catherine frowned slightly but kept her composure. "We're following protocol, Anna. They refused to cooperate when I asked them to move, and I have no reason to reverse my decision." Anna didn't agree but didn't dare argue further. She quietly walked away, the worry on her face evident. Back in the economy cabin, the story continued to spread. A young passenger decided to stand up, walk to the front of the cabin, and demand to speak with the lead flight attendant. "I want to know why those two passengers were moved back here. I don't think this is right," the man said loudly, drawing attention from everyone in the economy section. Jamal gently grabbed his arm and said softly, "Thank you, but there's no need to make a big scene." The man turned back to Jamal and replied, "No, this isn't right, and people need to know the truth." The blatant injustice of Jamal and Kofi being moved to economy was becoming increasingly obvious. The stares, murmurs, and reactions from other passengers were stirring up a quiet wave of discontent. But amidst the frustration, a young boy suddenly recognized their identities, turning the situation on its head. Will the story continue to simmer under the surface, or will the truth about Jamal and Kofi ignite a firestorm on this fateful flight? Don't miss what happens next, where justice will face its toughest challenges yet. Leave a comment and stay tuned. The story of Jamal and Kofi being moved to economy class was no longer confined to just that section of the plane. A few passengers walking past first class to use the restroom or speak with flight attendants carried the murmurs with them. One young man in economy, a Korean passenger, began recording a video on his phone, capturing statements from other passengers and even trying to get comments from Jamal and Kofi themselves. "Do you two have anything to say? I think people need to know about this," he asked. Kofi shook his head, politely declining. "We don't want to disturb other passengers. This is a small matter, but the truth will come out soon enough. Jamal, though clearly frustrated, nodded in agreement with Kofi. Yes, we'll let the situation speak for itself, he said. However, some passengers were growing increasingly upset on their behalf. A middle-aged Korean woman sitting nearby said, "I'm going to write about this when I get home. This is unacceptable. If they bought first-class tickets, why should they be treated this way? Unbeknownst to anyone." A few rows away in economy, a passenger was quietly observing everything unfold. It was Mark Whitman, an African-American freelance journalist on his way back to Los Angeles for a major event. With the sharp instincts of a journalist, Mark immediately sensed that this could become a big story. Mark quietly turned on his phone, started recording audio of the surrounding conversations, and began drafting a quick social media post. Meanwhile, in first class, Catherine was starting to feel the pressure mounting. She noticed that several first-class passengers were now aware of Jamal and Kofi being moved to economy. Some were even whispering about how two famous soccer players were kicked out of first class. Anna Kim, the young flight attendant, approached Catherine once again, this time with a more anxious expression. "Catherine, this is getting out of hand. I just heard that some passengers have been recording videos. If they really are famous soccer players like people are saying, we might be facing a major crisis." Catherine frowned slightly, trying to maintain her composure. "Anna, I understand. But this needs to be handled after we land. For now, let's focus on doing our jobs." Anna wasn't satisfied with that response. She sighed and walked away, unable to shake the feeling that Catherine wasn't grasping just how serious the situation had become. Mark Whitman, the freelance journalist seated in economy class, had just finished posting on social media with the following caption: "On today's flight from South Korea to the U.S., two famous soccer players were forced to move from first class to economy for no legitimate reason." Yet another example of discrimination. Equality Airline. The post immediately began to gain traction on social media, especially among the African American community and international soccer fans. Comments started flooding in. Discrimination again? This is absolutely unacceptable. Jamal and Kofi? They're legends in Korean soccer. How could the airline do this? I need to know the name of this airline. We need to boycott them. Mark watched as the story's reach quickly exceeded his expectations. He began drafting questions, preparing to interview Jamal and Kofi once the plane landed. Meanwhile, in first class, an older passenger who had been observing Catherine since the beginning of the flight finally decided to speak up. It was Mr. Kim, a prominent businessman in South Korea, who had been seated not far from where Jamal and Kofi had originally been. Mr. Kim called Catherine over and asked directly, "Ms. Catherine, I've heard that the two passengers you had moved are Jamal and Kofi, two well-known players from the Korean National Soccer League. Is that true?" Catherine froze for a moment but quickly regained her composure. "Yes, Mr. Kim. But I handled everything according to protocol." Mr. Kim frowned, his tone sharp with skepticism. "Protocol? They had valid first-class tickets. What reason could you possibly have for moving them to economy?" Catherine remained silent, unsure of how to respond. The doubt in Mr. Kim's gaze only increased the pressure on her. At the same time, another passenger in economy, who seemed to have recognized Jamal and Kofi's identities, decided to speak out by calling for the lead flight attendant. He raised his voice intentionally, ensuring the surrounding passengers could hear him. "I want to know why two national soccer stars are being treated this way. Jamal and Kofi aren't just players, they're symbols of South Korea's pride in soccer." Those words caused the atmosphere in the economy cabin to erupt. Passengers began talking loudly, and some even stood up, craning their necks toward the front of the plane as if they were ready to confront the crew. Meanwhile, in first class, another flight attendant hurried over to Catherine and whispered urgently in her ear, "Catherine, the captain just got word from the ground. The story about those two passengers is spreading on social media. Airline leadership is demanding we handle this delicately and resolve the situation immediately." Catherine's face turned pale. This was her worst fear, and now it had come true. Catherine was forced to call a quick meeting with the crew in the galley at the back of the plane. She spoke briefly. "The situation has escalated. Those two passengers, Jamal and Kofi, are famous athletes. The story has gone public. Leadership is ordering us to apologize and return them to first class." Anna Kim, who had disagreed with Catherine's handling of the situation from the start, couldn't hide her frustration. We never should have done this in the first place. If you hadn't let your biases control you, none of this would have happened. Catherine didn't respond. Shame bubbled up inside her, but she couldn't bring herself to admit it in front of her colleagues. After the brief meeting, the captain decided to step in personally to resolve the issue. Over the airplane's intercom, his voice echoed throughout the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the inconvenience that has occurred. Passengers Jamal and Kofi, if you would, please return to the first-class cabin so that the crew may apologize to you directly. We deeply regret any misunderstandings that have taken place." The captain's words reverberated throughout the plane, capturing everyone's attention. Many passengers clapped, but Jamal and Kofi didn't stand up immediately. Instead, they sat quietly, looking at each other, then at the passengers around them. Jamal spoke softly. "What do you think, Kofi? Do we go back or let them deal with the consequences on their own?" Kofi closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "We go back. Not for them, but for everyone who stood up for us. Let's show them that we're more than just victims." The two of them rose, leaving the economy cabin amidst applause from the passengers. Jamal and Kofi walked down the narrow aisle of the economy cabin, leaving behind supportive gazes and scattered claps from the passengers. They maintained their composure and dignity, even though a mix of disappointment and anger churned within them. As they entered the first-class cabin, the atmosphere shifted immediately. A heavy silence filled the space, as if everyone was trying not to exacerbate the awkwardness. Some passengers sitting near the aisle gave them quick glances, while others turned their faces away, avoiding Jamal and Kofi's eyes entirely. Jamal shrugged slightly and murmured to Kofi, "Look at them. They're acting like they're afraid we're going to lose it. It's hilarious." Kofi responded curtly, "Stay calm. Let them see we're not what they think we are." They approached their original seats, 2 window-side chairs, and saw that everything had been left as it was. Their small belongings had been returned to their place, as if nothing had ever happened. Catherine Park, the lead flight attendant, stood next to their seats, her face tense but attempting to appear professional. She forced a strained smile and gave a slight bow as they approached. "Mr. Jamal, Mr. Kofi," Catherine began, her voice slightly trembling. "I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding earlier. It was my mistake to handle the situation inappropriately. We are committed to doing everything we can to ensure you feel comfortable for the rest of this flight." Jamal looked directly at Catherine, his gaze sharp. "Misunderstanding? Your mistake wasn't a misunderstanding, it was bias. Don't tell me you don't know exactly what you did." His words made Catherine's face go pale. She felt as though she had been completely exposed in front of the entire first-class cabin. Kofi placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, as if to ease the tension. He turned to Catherine, his voice low but weighted with meaning. "We don't need a half-hearted apology. What we need is change. What you did didn't just offend us, it hurt countless others who are like us. I hope you understand that." Catherine bowed her head lower, unable to respond further. As Jamal and Kofi settled back into their seats, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained heavy. A few passengers, who had been silently observing the situation from the start, felt a pang of guilt. They knew they should have spoken up when the injustice occurred, but they had chosen silence to avoid trouble. A middle-aged man sitting a few rows away from Jamal finally decided to speak. He set down his newspaper and, in Korean, said gently but clearly, "I'm sorry. I sat here and witnessed everything, but I didn't do anything. That was my mistake." Jamal turned to look at him, a faint smile appearing on his face. "Thank you for your apology. But the truth is, we've gotten used to things like this. What I hope is that next time, if you see someone being treated unfairly, you'll stand up for them." The man nodded solemnly, his expression serious. "I understand. Next time, I won't stay silent." Those words seemed to ease the tension in the cabin. A few other passengers nodded in agreement, and the atmosphere gradually began to lighten. About 20 minutes later, the captain of the flight, a man in his 50s with a stern yet approachable demeanor, entered the first-class cabin. He bowed respectfully to Jamal and Kofi before taking a seat across from them. "Mr. Jamal, Mr. Kofi," he began, his voice deep and warm. "I'm Captain Lee, the pilot in charge of this flight. First and foremost, I want to offer my deepest apologies for what you have experienced. As the leader of this flight, I take full responsibility for the incident." Jamal looked at the captain, his eyes still guarded. Your apology is more meaningful than the ones we've heard so far. But I hope you understand this isn't just about one flight. This is about how a system treats people who are different. Captain Lee nodded, his expression serious. I completely understand. As soon as this flight is over, I will submit a detailed report about this incident to the airline's leadership. I assure you, we will investigate thoroughly and work to improve our processes to prevent situations like this from happening again. Kofi spoke up, his voice calm yet commanding. Captain Lee, I hope you don't see us as just two famous passengers. Because if we were ordinary people, would we have received this level of attention? Kofi's words made Captain Lee pause for a moment. He took a deep breath before responding. You're absolutely right. And I acknowledge that this system needs to change. I promise to do my part to start that change here. As the captain walked away, Catherine stood quietly at the back of the cabin, observing everything from a distance. Jamal and Kofi's words, especially about prejudice and the system, echoed in her mind. She realized that her mistake wasn't just a small error, it was letting unconscious bias dictate her actions. And that mistake hadn't just hurt the two men sitting in front of her, it had also damaged her own dignity and the reputation she worked so hard to uphold. Anna Kim, Catherine's younger colleague, approached her and spoke softly. Have you thought about apologizing to them? Not as a flight attendant, but as a person. Catherine stayed silent for a long moment before replying. I will. Not because I have to, but because I need to face this. As the flight continued, more passengers in first class began to realize they had witnessed something shameful. Some turned to Jamal and Kofi to start conversations, expressing their admiration for the players' talent, while also apologizing for their earlier silence. A young woman spoke in English. I'm such a fan of you both. I'm sorry I didn't say anything when I saw you being treated unfairly. Thank you for staying calm and showing so much grace. Jamal smiled. Oh, thank you. But I hope next time you won't stay silent. Not just for us, but for anyone who needs support. Meanwhile, in the cruise break area, Captain Lee made an urgent call to the airline's leadership via satellite phone. He detailed the incident, emphasizing that the issue wasn't just Catherine's actions, but a systemic failure in the airline's training and customer relations practices. The leadership team instructed Captain Lee to submit a full report after the flight landed and promised to hold an emergency meeting to address the matter. Jamal and Kofi returned to their first-class seats, but it didn't feel like a victory. The tense atmosphere and Catherine's half-hearted apology only exposed the deeply ingrained biases within the system. Meanwhile, the passengers' glances ranging from awkward to apologetic highlighted that this injustice wasn't just an issue for two individuals, but a reflection of society at large. Will Catherine's and the crew's promises for change truly lead to meaningful progress? Or will this prove to be just a temporary move to diffuse the situation? Don't miss the next chapter, where the storm of public opinion may expose everything. Leave a comment and stay tuned. While the flight was still in the air, news of the incident involving Jamal and Kofi had spread rapidly across social media, largely thanks to the post by freelance journalist Mark Whitman. Within just a few hours, Mark's post had garnered thousands of shares and comments. From international soccer fans to human rights activists, people expressed outrage over the discrimination faced by the two famous athletes. Jamal and Kofi are national icons, and they're still treated like this? This airline has some serious explaining to do. No one, no matter who they are, should face discrimination because of their skin color. We can't let this be forgotten. We must demand a public apology from the airline. This isn't just about Jamal and Kofi, it's about all of us. Hashtags like Equality in Pesquis, Jamal and Kofi, and End Discrimination quickly climbed to the top of Twitter and Instagram's trending lists. Several high-profile figures in sports and entertainment, including internationally renowned soccer players, shared the story, amplifying its reach and escalating the situation further. At the airline's headquarters in Seoul, an emergency meeting was convened as the leadership team realized the gravity of the situation. The CEO, Park Jung-ho, read through reports from the communications team, his expression growing darker as he saw the rising wave of outrage on social media. Several major shareholders had already reached out to express concerns about the potential damage to the airline's reputation. We're not just dealing with a scandal, Park said gravely. We're facing the risk of losing the trust of both our customers and our investors. We need to act immediately. Lee Soo-jin, the director of communications, proposed. We need to contact the captain of the flight to get a full understanding of what's happening. Then, I suggest issuing an official statement apologizing for the incident and committing to an internal investigation to improve our processes. Park nodded. And remember, this isn't just about Jamal and Kofi. This is about how we treat customers of all backgrounds and ethnicities. If we don't handle this the right way, we could lose our position as a leader in the global aviation industry. And on the flight, Catherine felt the weight of mounting pressure pressing down on her. The other flight attendants, especially Anna Kim, avoided making eye contact with her, and the usual respect they showed her was now absent. Catherine knew that if this story exploded after landing, her career could be completely ruined. As she mulled over her actions, she glanced toward Jamal and Kofi, who were sitting and speaking calmly to each other. Their demeanor was composed, but their eyes still held a resolute strength. A deep sense of regret began to rise within Catherine. Finally, she decided to approach them not as the lead flight attendant, but as a person who needed to admit her mistakes. "Mr. Jamal, Mr. Kofi," she began, her voice trembling more than usual. I want to apologize again. Not as an employee of the airline, but as an individual. What I did was truly wrong, and I let my biases control my actions." Kofi looked at Catherine, his eyes reflecting a thoughtful silence. He didn't respond immediately, but Jamal spoke first. "You're right, you were wrong. But what matters to me now is whether you've learned something from this. Your apology only means something if it comes with change." Catherine nodded, her eyes showing sincerity. "I've learned. And I promise I'll never let this happen again. Thank you for staying calm and not letting the situation spiral out of control," Kofi responded, his tone softer this time. "Let's hope you keep that promise." As the flight continued, Mark Whitman, the freelance journalist sitting in economy, decided to make his way to first class to speak directly with Jamal and Kofi. Mark tapped lightly on their seats to get their attention, then introduced himself. "Hello, gentlemen. My name is Mark Whitman, and I'm a freelance journalist. I've heard about your story and shared it on social media. It's gaining a lot of traction right now. I think this could be an opportunity for you both to send a powerful message to the public." Jamal was slightly surprised but quickly recognized Mark's good intentions. "Thank you, Mark. But we don't want to turn this into a vendetta or a personal attack. What we want is for this to serve as a reminder that no one should ever be treated unfairly because of the color of their skin or the way they look," Kofi added. "We're willing to share our story, but not to destroy anyone. We want to inspire change in the system and in how people treat one another." Mark nodded, showing his agreement. "I understand. I'll write this story in the way you hope, not just about the injustice, but about the strength of dignity and the push for change." Soon after, Jamal and Kofi received messages from their families in the U.S. Their families had already seen the story circulating on social media and were deeply concerned. Jamal's mother, in a text message, wrote, "Jamal, I'm so proud of you for staying calm. You and Kofi must always remember that you deserve respect, no matter what anyone thinks. Never let anyone make you forget that." The supportive words from their families warmed Jamal and Kofi's hearts. They knew that the encouragement of their loved ones and fans would be their greatest source of strength as they faced the aftermath once they landed. As the flight approached Los Angeles, the pressure from social media and news outlets covering the incident had reached its peak. Airline leadership was in constant communication with the flight crew, demanding updates on the situation. Captain Lee announced over the internal system that airline representatives and a group of reporters would be waiting at the airport to address the story. He urged the crew to prepare themselves mentally, as this was no longer just a minor incident. Catherine Park felt her heart race. She knew that things would not be easy for her once the plane landed. As the plane prepared to land at Los Angeles International Airport, the atmosphere in the cabin grew more tense than ever. From economy to first class, nearly every passenger could sense the unusual weight of the situation. Some had already learned that the media was waiting at the airport. Curious, anxious, and tense glances flickered throughout the cabin. Jamal and Kofi, seated calmly in first class, exchanged a quiet look, both fully aware that a new battle would begin the moment they stepped off the plane. "You ready?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but filled with determination. Kofi nodded, grabbing his leather briefcase. "We don't need to fight. We just need to speak the truth." In the crew's rest area at the back of the plane, Catherine Park quietly watched them. Her heart was heavy with worry. The thought of facing the judgmental stares of her colleagues, the passengers, and soon the public felt like a storm crashing down on her. As the plane taxied along the runway and finally came to a stop, the captain's voice rang out over the speakers. "We have landed at Los Angeles International Airport. Thank you for flying with us today. We wish you a pleasant day." On any other day, those words might have brought a sense of relief to passengers. But today, no one felt at ease. At the plane's exit, the scene was swarmed with flashing lights and cameras. A group of reporters from major media outlets had already assembled, armed with microphones, phones, and video equipment, ready to report on the story that had gone viral across social media. As soon as Jamal and Kofi appeared, the reporters surged forward, jostling to get closer. "Mr. Jamal, Mr. Kofi, can you tell us what happened on the flight? Was this an act of racial discrimination by the airline? Do you plan to sue the airline?" The barrage of questions and the relentless flashing of cameras created a chaotic atmosphere. Kofi raised his hand, signaling for the reporters to calm down. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice low but commanding. "We will share our story, but not right now. What I want you to know at this moment is this: no one deserves to be treated the way we were treated on that flight. This is not just about Jamal and Kofi. This is about everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of their skin color or background." Kofi's words silenced the crowd for a few seconds. Then Jamal spoke. "We're not here to tear anyone down, and we're not here to start a fight. What we want is for the airline and every customer service system in the world to understand that everyone deserves respect. Change needs to start in the smallest of places." Their statements were broadcast live across social media platforms and major news networks. Within minutes, video clips of their remarks began spreading rapidly, capturing the attention of millions. Shortly after Jamal and Kofi left the press area, a representative from the airline, Lee Soo-jin, the director of communications, held an emergency press conference. Standing before a barrage of questions from the media, Lee maintained a serious demeanor, conveying a deep sense of concern. "First, we want to extend our deepest apologies to passengers Jamal and Kofi, as well as to the public, for this unfortunate incident. Our airline does not tolerate any form of discrimination, and we are committed to conducting a thorough investigation into this matter," Lee Soo-jin stated. A reporter asked, "Does the airline plan to take disciplinary action against the employee responsible for this incident?" Lee responded, "We will conduct an internal investigation and take appropriate disciplinary action if any violations of our ethical standards and company policies are found. Furthermore, we will be implementing a comprehensive training program for all employees to increase awareness of unconscious bias and improve our service to diverse customers." While Lee's promises didn't completely quell the public outrage, they at least demonstrated that the airline was taking responsibility for its mistakes. After all the passengers had disembarked, Catherine was called aside by Captain Lee for a private conversation. His expression was serious, though not harsh. "Catherine, you know that what happened today doesn't just affect those two passengers, it's also had a significant impact on the airline and the entire flight crew," Captain Lee began. Catherine nodded, her gaze heavy with regret. "I know, Captain. I was wrong. I have no excuses for my actions. I'll need to submit a full report of this incident to senior management," Captain Lee continued. "But I hope you understand that this is an opportunity for you to learn, not the end of the road." Catherine felt a small sense of relief. She knew her career might be affected, but at least she had the chance to make amends for her mistake. After leaving the airport, Jamal and Kofi were invited to a nearby hotel to meet with representatives of the airline, including Lee Soo-jin and a few members of the leadership team. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room, with soft lighting and a serious atmosphere. Lee began with a heartfelt apology. "Mr. Jamal, Mr. Kofi, on behalf of the entire airline, I want to apologize for what happened. We cannot change what has already occurred, but we are committed to ensuring that no one has to experience this kind of treatment again." Jamal and Kofi listened calmly. They didn't ask for compensation or demand any special privileges. Kofi spoke. "We don't want apologies to stop at words. We want to see action, from improving your employee training processes to ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, is treated with respect on your flights," Kofi said firmly. "Ms." Lee nodded, carefully writing down every word. "I understand. And I commit that within the next 30 days, we will provide you with a detailed report on the changes we plan to implement." When the situation had finally calmed, Jamal and Kofi sat together in their hotel room, gazing out at the lights of Los Angeles. Jamal poured himself a glass of water, then said, "Today was exhausting, but I think it's going to leave a big impact." Kofi nodded in agreement. "It will. Not just for them, but for us too, about how we handle injustice. If we hadn't kept our composure, things could have gone in a very different direction." They sat in silence for a moment before Kofi added, "But this isn't over. This is just the beginning." Following their meeting with Jamal and Kofi, the airline had no choice but to implement a series of rapid reforms. Within 2 weeks, they held a major press conference to publicly apologize to Jamal, Kofi, and all passengers affected by the incident. Lee Soo-jin, the airline's director of communications, stood before hundreds of journalists and delivered a formal statement. "We take full responsibility for the incident that occurred on our recent flight. We not only apologize to passengers Jamal and Kofi, but also to the wider community that felt hurt by this event. To prevent such situations in the future, we are committing to the following measures. The comprehensive employee training. All airline staff will participate in a mandatory program focused on unconscious bias awareness and serving passengers from diverse cultural backgrounds. Revamping complaint handling processes. We will improve our customer complaint handling procedures to ensure fairness and transparency. Partnerships with equality experts. We will collaborate with international experts and organizations focused on equality to improve our corporate culture." These commitments were made not only to restore the airline's reputation, but to prevent the risk of a similar scandal occurring in the future. Catherine Park, after being temporarily suspended pending an investigation, had to attend a meeting with the airline's leadership. The reports from Captain Lee and other staff made it clear that her actions stemmed from unconscious bias. But the airline also recognized that this was not solely an individual problem, it was a result of inadequate training across the system. The leadership decided not to terminate Catherine, but demoted her from head flight attendant to a regular crew member. She was also required to participate in intensive unconscious bias training and write a personal essay about her experience to share with all employees. In the months that followed, Catherine worked hard to rebuild herself. She learned to put herself in the passenger's shoes and came to understand that everyone deserves fair treatment. This experience became a major turning point in both her career and mindset. As the controversy settled, Jamal and Kofi were approached by numerous nonprofit organizations to participate in campaigns raising awareness about equality and combating discrimination. One of the most significant events they attended was the Global Conference on Equity in Service held in New York. At the conference, Jamal spoke to an audience of thousands. "What's important isn't that we're famous athletes. What's important is that anyone, no matter who they are or where they come from, deserves to be treated with respect. There is no justification for discrimination." Kofi followed up, "We don't want what happened to us to just be another story that grabs attention and is forgotten. We want it to serve as a reminder that change cannot stop at an apology. It requires action, commitment, and time." The two became ambassadors for the campaign Equity in the Skies, partnering with other airlines to develop global standards for passenger service, ensuring that no one would have to endure what they experienced. The story of Jamal and Kofi sparked a positive ripple effect across the international community. People who had faced discrimination on flights and in customer service began sharing their own stories, forming a movement that demanded change. A young African-American woman shared on social media, "I was once denied my seat in first class even though my ticket was valid, just because they thought I didn't belong. Thank you, Jamal and Kofi, for standing up and speaking out for all of us." An Asian passenger in Europe wrote, "This incident wasn't just about race. It was about the lack of respect for anyone who doesn't fit the so-called standard image that society has defined. Thank you for bringing attention to this." Public support for Jamal and Kofi didn't just stop at encouragement, it also put immense pressure on service companies worldwide, forcing them to reevaluate their training processes and customer service attitudes. After spending time focusing on social campaigns, Jamal and Kofi returned to the soccer field for a special exhibition match between the South Korean national team and the U.S. national team. The match was organized to raise funds for global anti-discrimination organizations. The stadium was packed, not only with soccer fans but also with supporters of the message of equality. As Jamal and Kofi stepped onto the field, the entire stadium rose to its feet, erupting into thunderous applause. Banners with messages like equality for all and respect is a right, not a privilege could be seen throughout the stands. During the game, Jamal scored a stunning goal, while Kofi delivered an incredible assist that brought the crowd to its feet. But the most memorable part of the night wasn't the game's score, it was the powerful message the two athletes carried with them. After the match, Jamal addressed the crowd. Today, soccer has shown us that there are no borders between people. We come from different places, but we share the same home, this earth. And this home becomes better when we treat one another with respect and fairness, Kofi added. Remember, change doesn't come from just one match, one event, or one story. It comes from each of us, from the small actions we take every day to ensure everyone is treated as they deserve. As time went on, the story of Jamal and Kofi was no longer just an incident on a flight. It became a symbol of change and an inspiration for millions. The airline, after implementing significant reforms, gradually regained its reputation and became a model for how to handle crises and rebuild trust. Catherine Park, having learned from her major mistake, became a better leader and took charge of the airline's employee training program. She shared her story to help others avoid making the same errors. Jamal and Kofi continued their soccer careers but also dedicated time to participating in social campaigns and inspiring younger generations. Their journey was captured in a documentary titled Equality in the Skies, spreading the message of respect and equality across the globe. Thank you for watching this powerful story of resilience, change, and the fight for equality. Jamal and Kofi's journey reminds us all that respect and fairness should never be conditional. It's something every person deserves, no matter who they are or where they come from. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to help spread this important message far and wide. Let's continue the conversation in the comments. What does equality mean to you, and how can we all contribute to a fairer world? Together, we can create a future where everyone is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. See you in the next video.